Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, The Disciple Hour, Episode 3. Now, today we're going to discuss the topic of suffering for Christ. And then we will also have a look at an anti white verbal attack on a train against a little white boy. I'll be alone today unless anyone else joins me. But the topic is to suffer for Christ. And this topic came up when me and the lads, we were talking about, I can't remember how exactly the topic came about, but we were talking about the film Tortured for Christ. It is from Romania, post Second World War, after the communist takeover of Romania. And there's a couple, Richard Wurmbrand and his wife Sabina, or Sabrina, can't remember which. And they are both Christians, and the man is a pastor. And when the communists take over, they subvert Christianity. That's one of the first things they do. They claim that Karl Marx was a prophet, um, Hegel and Nietzsche, and they claim that communism is pretty much the fulfillment of Christianity and whatnot, and they totally subvert it completely. And so this film is based on a book by Richard Wurmbrand, and in the film he is depicted in this theater where the communists have gathered together notable, respectable preachers or pastors in Romania at the time, and they are all praising the communist system. But then he is sitting there on the upper floor with his wife, and his wife basically tells him that she has no use for a coward as a husband. um, and he then decides to stand up and speak. And so he goes down and he gets the stage. And the communists, they are afraid to deny him to talk because he's very respected. But they think to themselves, well, if he is on their side, well, then that's going to be a propaganda victory for them. But they have no idea what he's about to say. He basically he defies them. He totally defies the communist system, and he is speaking, and the recording is being broadcast on the radio. And in the communist states at the time, this was broadcast on the streets. There was these loudspeakers on the streets, and people would stop by and listen. And so he preached the gospel. He preached Christ to the Romanian people, and they eventually cut him off. And when he realized that they had cut him off, he taps on the mic like that and realizes that it's off. And then he goes out, and his wife joins him, and they quickly get out of there. And then he is marked from that time, from that day. But he doesn't quit. He performs baptisms. It's only the most trusted in the underground church are invited for baptisms, because it was extremely dangerous. If you were caught baptizing someone, it meant jail time. But he did it nonetheless. And the verses that always came to him during that difficult time was, do not be afraid. We should not be afraid. And he risks his life going into the Russian military camps because the Russians occupied Romania. And he was preaching the gospel to the Russian soldiers. And he would use all kinds of pretexts to sneak in, and he would pretend that he wanted to buy watches from the Russian soldiers, which they had stolen from the Romanian citizens, and people often came to buy them back. But he pretended he was there to buy watches, and then he just started to preach. And the Russian soldiers, they gathered around and they would listen. But then some other soldier would, open the door and check on them. What are they doing? And then he would have the excuse, like, okay, 50, whatever the currency was, and shake his hand and buy the watch. And he kept doing this for a few years, maybe 2 or 3 years, but eventually the communists, they kidnapped him um, in the middle of the street, just beat him, put a bag over his head, dragged him into a car, and drove away, and to a prison where he was tortured. And the torturing scenes are just horrific, but I'm told that the book is even worse, that it's much more brutal in the book. And what was interesting is that the communist torturer, he told him, according to this film anyway, that he liked being evil, that he enjoyed it. And he always rationalized it by saying, well, you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. And he had no sympathy. He just dehumanized his victim so he could torture him in the most inhumane ways possible. And another pastor was flogged, and his son was chained in front of him and whiplashed and beaten and eventually murdered in front of his father. But the little boy, well, teenage boy, he died with Christ on his lips. He told his father not to give his torturer the names. And none of them betrayed their comrades. They all suffered just horrendously for Christ. They would not give up their comrades. And this Richard Wurmbrand, he was tortured for 14 years. I think he spent 14 years in prison, tortured every day, almost every single day. And if they were caught praying, they were tortured. And he prayed every single day. And his torturer, he opened the cell, like a little hatch on the door, and saw him praying. And he kept dragging him out, saying, you're not allowed to pray. And so he tortured him. But eventually, the torturer, he just snapped at him. He lost his mind. He claims, you've lost your life. Your wife is in prison. I'll get into that. And your son is an orphan. What could you possibly be praying about right now? And then Richard told him, I was praying for you. And the man's jaw just dropped to the ground. And just little by little, he turned his torturer. Maybe not completely, but at least the torturer started to doubt his own philosophy. But yeah, going to his wife, they just made up some nonsensical charge against her, accused her of having hidden weapons in her apartment. Of course, they found no weapons, but they arrested her nonetheless and put her into a labor camp. and this was a project to build a canal between the Danube River and the Black Sea. And some engineers had told the communist regime that this was impossible, and the engineers were all shot. And she was put to labor there, and she would preach the gospel in the labor camps. They were not allowed to talk, but she talked nonetheless and whispered prayers and verses to the inmates, to the workers. And she was beaten very brutally, thrown into the river on a very cold day, and she broke two ribs when she landed on rocks in the river, and she swam onto the bank, and the Russian soldiers mocked her and told her, "Where's your God now?" And the story doesn't tell how she got out, but they both did get out in the 1960s, and they were brought to America, to California, I believe. But Richard Wurmbrand, uh, in his jail, he would still just preach to his inmates and share the gospel, even though the guards were listening on the doors outside. They could hear them pray and sing. They didn't care. They did it nonetheless. The guards, they burst in and took them outside, beat them, and they could hear the screams from the other room. And then when the man who was tortured was brought back into the room with them, they would just continue, uh, pick up where they left off the last time. And they would have a little bread, and they would break bread. And they would even use their chains as instruments. And when I was watching this film, I just thought to myself, could I possibly replicate this? Could I do what he did for 14 years, being tortured every single day for Christ? I don't think I could, to be honest. And I respect these men so much. What they went through is just plain awful. And this film. I'm definitely going to read the book now after seeing the film. But this just shows you uh, how to be brave in the face of tyranny. In the end, we have nothing to fear. If you die as a martyr for Christ, then you are rewarded tenfold in heaven. But going through this torture is just unthinkable. And all he had to do was just give a few names and it would stop. They would let him go. For 14 years, he did not give a single name. It's incredible. So, and we were joking about it, like, well, not quite joking, being quite serious. I mean, if the regime starts, you know, coming down on us pretty hard, we could just hope to have, half as much faith as these men did. Uh, we need to have faith in order to defeat this evil regime and recapture our destiny. But I think I'll stop here I do recommend this film, Tortured for Christ. But now I'm going to talk about an anti-white verbal attack on a train. There was this this anti-white black guy who just kept shouting verbal abuse at a little white boy, maybe aged 3 or 4, maybe 4 years old. And his parents are, he's between his parents, and they do nothing. They are so afraid, they do nothing. And I'm going to play this clip. Copy it here. Okay. Here, let's watch this.
Take them back to Europe with y'all.
Yeah, me too.
Gay ass here, Caribbean, African gay ass gorilla looking. Shut up, your ugly body. Nasty ass, mutating, permutating, corrugating, etiolating skin. Shut up, your body don't even last long enough. I'm gonna look younger than him by the time he's my age. I don't care about them ugly ass kids in your race. Shut up.
89?
Plastic ass body.
86?
Little debilitated, innervated, emasculated, feeble, incapacitated, indisposed, emaciating, attenuating, tenuous body. I don't care about you. Shut up, you white monkey. You a dog in this country. You're a dog. You're nothing over here. You are a dog. Shut up. I'm Black American. I'm over you. What you doing? What?
All right. Yeah, that's enough. I mean, as you can see in this video, there's a black guy here, and behind him here. They do nothing. They do absolutely nothing. They don't care. They're anti-white, every single one of them. And the mother just tells his son to count to 100 or whatever. And the dad, he does nothing. He tells him to F off or F you or something. But what is likely happening here is that this anti-white black here, he wants a confrontation. He wants the white man to attack him so that he can beat him, so that they can film it and spin the narrative, lie, claim that the white man just attacked the poor innocent black man, and just play on the anti-white narrative. That is likely what was happening. But this is just horrific. This guy is clearly not stupid. I mean, you could hear his vocabulary. But my goodness, the hatred, the sheer hatred. I could not do this to my worst enemy, to call his child these racial slurs and names. I could never do this to a child. But this is what anti-whiteism does, folks. It rots away your soul. It rots away your soul. There is no kindness left in this man, just racial hatred towards white people. This is the mess we're in. The white father, he can't really do anything. He knows it. I mean, first of all, this black man, this anti-white black, he looks, muscular, strong. So to brawl with him would be potential suicide. If the black man, cunningly receives the moral high ground and knocks the white man out with one punch, well, then he is laying unconscious on the floor, leaving the white woman and the child totally defenseless against this animal. And you bet that these anti-white blacks here, they won't do anything. They won't do jack squat. But this is just so infuriating. We are so dehumanized. I'm talking about white people. We are so dehumanized that this doesn't even make the front news page. Everyone knows, no matter how dumb you are, everybody knows that if the races here were reversed, I get tired of saying this, but you know it's true. If this was a white man and these this here a black family with their black son and a white guy sleeping here and a white guy standing here doing nothing, and the white guy was shouting racial abuse at the poor black child, and the white man just standing by doing nothing, you bet that this would be front page news. It would never end. There would be another summer of anti-white terror, like in 2020 after George Floyd. You bet. Everyone knows. That's the truth. That's what would happen. But since the victims are white and the anti-white narrative is pervasive, everyone is living inside the anti-white narrative these days, so that this animal can have the moral high ground to shout racial abuse at a little boy because of the fictional anti-white narrative. What did he say? I'm a black American. I'm an African American. I'm over you. He knows it. He knows that he has all the power. They have numerical courage. White people do not have a numerical courage. They don't even view themselves as a people. They're so deracinated. This is just so infuriating. Not the verbal attack itself, but how white people respond to it. The white parents, they know that they're defenseless. They know they can't do anything. The white man, he knows that if he were to beat this man, to punch him, the other blacks would probably at that point defend their racial brother. That's sadly what they do. I mean, if they are okay with this, then you bet they are anti-white. So they're not playing fairly, folks. Just think for a moment. And the response of white people, I read the comment section. It was pathetic, to say the least. White people, they know, yeah, okay, they're angry, like, yeah, but they're so powerless. So it's just like, gosh, should I read some of the comments? No, I'll get so frustrated. I remember some of them. They were like, calling this a quote unquote racist attack. Now, folks, the term racist, is an anti-white concept. Racist, quote unquote, racist is an anti-white slur. Don't believe me? I'll prove it to you. Close your eyes, please. Close your eyes. And I want you to imagine the archetype of a racist. Is he white or is he non-white? He's white. Everyone thinks of a white person when they think of a quote-unquote racist. That's because inside the anti-white narrative, which is dominant, pervasive, everywhere you go, you cannot escape it, the term racist and racism is only perpetrated by white people inside the anti-white narrative. And you cannot change the meaning of the word in people's minds. The dictionary explanation definition does not apply. What applies is how it is actualized in people's minds. Now, you need to call this an anti-white verbal attack. An anti-white attack. This man here is an anti-white. It's a noun. This man here is an anti-white. This is what anti-whiteism does. And this is happening whilst white people are still the majority in the US. It's gonna get so much worse if we do not defend ourselves on the basis of our race, because we are being victimized on the basis of our race. It's gonna get so much worse, folks. You cannot be a coward. And this ties to our topic, suffering for Christ. It reduces to bravery and cowardice. Do not fall into the trap of playing the villain inside the anti-white narrative. Opposing this POS, this anti-white monster, this child predator, this anti-white child predator. Opposing him is not evil. You do not, throw racial abuses back. That's not the Christian way. Just call him an anti-white. Anyone can be anti-white. There are plenty of anti-white white people. Just read the freaking news. Go to a college campus if you don't believe me. Do not respond by calling him the N-word. Please don't. That actually enforces the anti-white narrative, and he will gain a moral high ground. Okay? No, what you need to do is you need to call this an anti-white attack. You need to make it clear that this is unacceptable. Do not go to some freaking abstractions. Do not do what Steven Crowder is doing, calling this a quote-unquote racist attack. Come on. The term racist means white people being mean to non-white people in the minds of billions of people around the globe. That's what quote-unquote racism means. So you need to call it what it is, anti-whiteism. We don't always talk about race on this podcast, but, we live in an anti-white world, a racialized anti-white world, and you have a duty to call it out. We do not blame Black people as a whole. We don't do that. We blame anti-whiteism. It's an ideology. It's an evil ideology. We don't blame any races for their, we do not blame people for their immutable characteristics. Anti-whiteism is a choice. Yeah, it's a choice. It's an evil choice. You need to get out of the anti-white narrative. You need to inoculate yourself against this anti-whiteism, and you need to call it out. Because this will end with a genocide, a total biological white erasure if we do nothing. So, are you brave? or are you a coward? And with that, I'll end the podcast. God bless you, everyone. Take care.